Family, what's good?
Hey,
This
hey.
is episode four of
I
the
know.
Raney and Roe show. I am I am Roe. I'm a
And I'm
writer.
Raney.
So I write comic books, I write all kinds of things. We've gone down the spiel, but in case you don't know me, right? I write comic books, screenplays. If you name it, I probably write it. And this is my partner.
Hey, hey. I'm Kayla, Raney, as people seem to be calling me these days. I am an artist, and I am the other half of Raney and Roe. I do comic illustrations, book illustrations, fine art painting, all of the above. If you guys have watched our previous episodes, you know exactly who we are.
Yes, yes, yes. And we are so happy to be here with you tonight. We're a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties, but we figured it
Roe's
out.
fault.
It's all good. I figured it out. It was my fault, right? She threw me under the bus. It's okay. I
I
can take
did.
it. It was my fault. I didn't know what was going on,
No,
but
it's
we
my
fixed
fault
it.
too, because we're the most technologically inept
Right,
creators on the planet. We have no
right.
business doing something with technology.
But we are here now, and it is all good. So today we are going to be talking about art and making art, creating art, even when life gets in the way, right? Um,
Yeah.
but before we do that, Kayla, do you want to talk about a little bit about our weeks, how our weeks went?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's
Yeah.
do
So
it.
how was your week? You can start.
It was rough, which
Okay.
I
Cool.
feel like is the whole premise to this show. I feel like I may be to blame for the slightly more heavy-handed topic that we're covering tonight. It was a really challenging week.
Mhm.
You know, I joke, but we just do so happen to be talking about what happens when like life gets in the way of our workflow as creators, and this kind of was one of the many instances in the past 2 years that has really put that to the test for me.
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, yeah, without getting into too much
Yeah.
detail, it was a rough one, but
Word.
feeling good. Yeah, kind of
Yeah.
recentering, like
Yeah.
just sort of immersing myself into Scarlet Ranger.
True. True.
Yeah.
True.
Dion always makes me feel better. It's great.
Yes, I love to hear that. I love to hear that.
What about
So
you?
my week was good. I'm finally getting into this new routine, just with like things changing with the kids and school, and just my wife is doing like a job readiness program, so she's doing that.
Awesome.
So our schedules have shifted a little bit. So now I'm finally like sort of getting into the groove of things, and getting a little bit more clarity. I think last episode I talked about not really being sure what direction to go.
Yeah.
So I took some time to just try to organize myself, and I put like my projects like in a spreadsheet, and just
Ooh.
trying to do a little better. You know what I'm saying? Organization.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Um,
like sexy writer work. That's like we're getting
yeah.
the shit done, writers work.
Well, what's interesting about that though is me doing that. It blocked me a little bit because I realized like
Oh.
I'm trying to do all this over here, and it was keeping me from actually doing the work. You know what I'm saying? Uh,
Ah.
So I'm trying to find like a happy medium of like just do enough organization so that I'm
Yeah.
organized, but not so much that I'm using it as procrastination, right?
Right.
Keeping it from, I'm not working on the story anymore. I'm just working on how it looks,
Yeah.
and how the spreadsheet looks, and how we label things, and what colors we're going to use. And like all of that is cool, but it's not story. You know what
Yes.
I'm saying? And
Yes.
so story is really in my opinion, is what I'm here for.
Right. Right.
So I just got to find that happy medium, that balance. You know what I'm saying? So it's been
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It's been good. Um. So yeah. So I guess we can go ahead and jump on in, right?
Let's do it. Let's jump
So
on
yeah.
in.
So I I was thinking about this topic, and I think that it's really timely right now
Yeah.
because of the past 2 or 3 years that we've had, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
So, you look, I call it the 5 years of 2020, right? So you had 2020, you had all these things happening, right? And I mean, like in January of
Yeah.
2020, Kobe Bryant dies, right?
Wow.
And then a pandemic breaks out and just
Yep.
shuts the world down, right?
Yep.
And then you have George Floyd, right?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, you just have all these things. Then you have the protests, right? And you have all these things happening, right? So by the time we get into 2021, it's like
Ooh.
it's only 2021. Like I
Right,
really
right.
thought
We're
it was like
creeping in
2030.
like we've aged 10 years. Yeah.
Right. It's crazy. And so I guess to kick this off, my first question is, during the 5 years of 2020,
Mm.
did you feel the heaviness of that? And did that affect your output?
Yeah. Yeah. So 2020 is complicated for me. It was the catalyst for me deciding to break away from having a day job as like a sense of security. I don't know how much choice I had in that, but it was a conscious decision to not return to having a day job because of what I discovered about what I was capable of doing
Mm,
as an independent creator through basically forced unemployment as a result of
gotcha.
the pandemic. And so I have this really mixed perspective where 2020 was so vital to where I am now because it forced me to take the step that I had been too afraid to take for years and years
Yeah.
prior to that, to let go of the security of that sort of pre-pandemic life.
Yeah.
But also I remember very vividly the emotional and psychological weight of that. You know, my husband and I were really afraid.
Mm,
We were waiting for basically like military encampments to start
right. Right.
showing up, or we were in Nashville at the time, and it really felt like we were going to be preparing for worst case scenario.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't something that I had really ever, none of us could have ever imagined that. But I spent so much of my younger life in constant state of like fight or flight. You
Yeah.
know, I I really expended a lot of that sort of like psychological energy in that time period. And there's a lot of, as I've discovered, trauma that rested in those feelings of like constant fight or flight. So when the pandemic was happening and all of a sudden I found myself back in that constant state, it it was the most bizarre situation for creating, I think and many other artists had ever faced.
Yeah.
How could I in good conscience be creating artwork and like asking people to support me as an artist while the world is like crumbling
On fire.
around me,
Right.
and this major civil upset like in our country, and the division that we were seeing like happening within our families, within our personal lives, within our country. Like
Right.
it was very hard to like wrestle with, is what I'm doing, does that matter right
Right.
now?
Right. Right.
Right? Like
Right.
how do I make it matter?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've ever like found an answer to that question.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's one of the things that I wrestle with
Yeah.
all the time is like, I feel like I wake up and my job is to make things up, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
then it's like, okay, but then when there's real world things happening, it's like, okay, should I be doing this right now? You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Like, is there something
Yeah.
like, should I be a grown up now? Like, what else should I be doing? And so I think
Right.
that's a very natural reaction. Like when you say, like, does this even matter?
Right.
Um, that's a scary thing in and of itself. I'm
Yeah.
spending all this time doing this, and then you ask yourself, but does it matter? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think, so today I was picking my kids up from daycare,
Yeah.
and I'm in the car, and I saw this horrible accident. Like I didn't see the accident, but I
Ugh.
saw. I mean, the cars were.
Right.
I mean, it was. There were ambulances and there were stretchers and there was
Yeah.
like, I mean, the cars were obliterated. You know what I'm saying? Like it was like I saw it and I was just like, yo, this is wild. And immediately when I saw the cars, I thought about what happened in Buffalo. That was my immediate thought. And
Yeah.
um I purposely I haven't followed it very closely,
Yeah.
just because like when George Floyd happened, I was invested. You know what I'm saying? Like I
Right.
was watching
Right.
every news, I was reading
Yeah.
every article. I was like,
Yeah.
inundated with it. Like I
They're
just had to
present.
see what was happening.
Yeah.
And now I've just gotten to this place where it's like, it's this balance of wanting to be aware of what's going on, but also I don't want to constantly fill myself with that, and
Right.
I just remember. And now I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but I just remember when George Floyd happened, I was watching CNN, and I'm watching the TV screen and they're showing the police officer with his knee on the man's neck, and my sons walk in
Oh
and
no.
they're like, I think one of them asked me like, Daddy, what's going on?
What's happening?
And
Yeah.
I was just like, damn. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that was a really difficult point. But I
Yeah.
say all that to say, like, when those things are happening, going back to
Mhm.
what we were talking about before, like when those things are happening, and then I have to go into the room and I have to, make up this fantasy story about these orcs or, whatever. It's like,
Right.
I don't should I be doing this right now? And I know some people who, like, I talked to one of my friends, he's like, yo, I'm about to write this comic book story. And he's like, I'm gonna do this. And he's like pouring
Yeah.
all his rage and all his pain into the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
And I'm like the opposite, where I'm like, I almost get paralyzed. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't even want to do that. Like, I just
Yeah.
want to figure something else out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so I guess I would ask you, what are some tactics that you have tactics that you use to, or maybe you're like that where you drown yourself in your work and you feel that burden. It's like, I'm gonna just go to my work. Like how do you handle that?
So that's like, I know I'm not very helpful tonight. It's also like a really complicated question.
For sure,
It
for sure.
it varies for me. I'm somebody that, because of the way that I practice art, I'm used to drawing from internal conflict. That is
Mm,
something that has like driven and shaped my art practice for as long as I can remember, is like feeding off of the internalized conflict that was happening. Something that I have learned in the last 2 to 3 years with everything that's happening externally is I do not react the same
yeah,
to external conflict and the feelings that that provokes in me. My first instinct is to protect my mental health, because it's the only way that I know how to keep putting like one foot forward. And something, I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but I've talked about this with another client of mine, where I'm very fortunate as to I am sort of able to compartmentalize the work that I do in comics versus the work that I do independently as sort of like a creative like feeding process. And I sit down at my desk, I'm working. Like that's, I can like shut off the part of
yeah,
my brain that is affected by any of that, and I am tunnel vision on like what I'm doing. But as soon as you ask me to be creative in like an autonomous way, like I don't have a script in front of me and I have a lot of conflict going on in my life, whether it be internalized or we're sort of dealing with like the world and sort of the really heavy hitting events that are happening around me and affecting the people that I love. that's when it gets complicated.
Yeah.
I definitely go between wanting to channel everything into that. I get super fired up about like, well, I'm going to make, revolution posters. I'm going to make like artwork that speaks to these causes that I believe in, that I'm invested in. I'm going to find a way to support and be an ally in the only offering that I have, which is, creating artwork, creating visual aids. And then another part of me is about the escapism, and
Right.
I think it comes down to like, I I find so much escapism in stories and fiction that I almost feel like it's my responsibility as an artist to like build a safe haven for
Right.
people to retreat into,
Right.
like, and I imagine you probably struggle with that as a writer. Like, do I build this world that can have a lot of the same parallels as what we are dealing with currently in our very like truly dystopian time,
Right.
and I build it as like a coping space,
Mm,
That's
mm,
how I've
mm.
always thought of like fiction, is like, this is the space where I can process things safely because it's not technically reality,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it feels like I'm supposed to be doing that. So like it changes from day to day. And I think
Yeah.
the only way that I have figured out to navigate it is just communicate.
Yeah.
I'm not perfect at it. Obviously, like I think over the last year or so, I've gotten a lot better at, telling clients like, hey, this is kind of where I'm at right now. And if I'm not capable of like producing the way that you need me to in this moment, like,
Yeah.
and like, please accept that with grace.
Yeah. For
And
sure.
that's something, as somebody who does not like to be vulnerable with people that I'm not close to, was really hard for me to accept that like that can be a part of being a creative professional, is being open about your mental health and like where you are in that moment, and just being honest about like, look, I'm not capable of this right now.
Right. Right.
And I think that it falls into something that I know that you struggle with as a creator. We are not robots. People tend to forget that we're human.
Right.
We're experiencing life very similar to the people that are employing us, to the people that are paying us for like these services that we're providing. We're expecting production from us,
Right. Right.
you know.
And I think there's that paradox of, so like when you say, does this matter, right? Like,
Yeah,
and creating these worlds for people to escape into.
yeah,
And we had that moment where there was this whole conversation about essential workers, who's essential
yeah,
and who's not essential, right? Um, but I think I saw, it was like a meme or something, but they were like, it's funny, people try to say that artists aren't essential, but who are the people that's creating that?
who are you going to? Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And so there's that paradox of like, man, like I don't feel like this matters because I'm just making things up.
right,
But the reality is that yes, I'm making things up, but it's I'm building it into something that's more than just a few scratches on my notebook or
yeah,
random notes on my computer or my Google Docs. Like this is my heart. Honestly, this is my heart
right,
on the page in this
right,
story. And like even when we talk about Scarlet Ranger
yeah,
and just some of the things you say about Scarlet Ranger, like I did not see as much of myself in Scarlet Ranger until you started pointing things out to me about it. And I'm like,
yeah,
oh wow, like there's a lot of me in there. And
yeah,
so it's like, while I thought I was just playing around making things up, I was actually like spilling my heart. You know what I'm saying? Like I
exactly,
was putting it out there for everybody to see. And in that, it becomes something that the world can find escape in, or they can
yeah,
find, value in, or they can find themselves in, right? They can see their reflection. And there's something truly powerful and valuable about that, right? Um, and so that can be so difficult to see, going back to something we talked about in previous episodes when we talk
yeah,
about art and capitalism and we talk about, some of these different things where it's like, if you're not selling a million books, doesn't
right,
matter. You know what I'm saying? Is it good enough? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Um, and so that's just interesting to think about.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say, you know, you're touching on this part of being a creative that's really important to me, and that I find myself reflecting on a lot over the last few years because of sort of the shift that we've experienced as an audience, where I think people are starting to realize how valuable artists and creators are to
Yeah,
social fabric
yeah,
and to the way that we process like our world. I I think there is so much value in the solidarity that we
mm,
find in storytelling. You know,
yeah,
that is what is most striking to me about, you know, for example, like the stories that you're telling, like through Scarlet Ranger, and if we put it in through the lens of like what is happening right now in America, you're telling a story about essentially like a black hero in sort of an American ish like future.
right.
And it's something that it's so important that people can relate to, whether or not they they normally would be following that type of storyline, because it's representing something in this positive but complex and nuanced way. It's relatable. It's something where you can share that experience regardless of what your race, your gender, your age
Hmm.
is. You can connect with the story. You find solidarity in the story of Scarlet Ranger and like the obstacles that he faces, the internal conflict that he faces.
Right.
And that's one of the most fascinating part of working in a storytelling industry is, you know, fiction is the great equalizer, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it is something that we can find refuge in together. So it feels important to be
Yeah,
working that way.
yeah,
And I don't I don't necessarily know if it matters so much anymore if you're selling a million books. I think the indie community is evidence of that, right? We're constantly pushing our stories. We're constantly saying, look at this, read this, connect to it,
yeah,
you know, make this a part of your life. I want to give this to you.
yeah,
I want
yeah,
you to experience this voice that I'm trying to put out into the world, and hopefully you find voice in it as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Um, but to be devil's advocate, we also have to pay our bills.
Right, right.
Which is why I like to like bring it back to like, you know, memes that you see on the internet. There's this one going around in the art community that's like the world is on fire, and then Will Ferrell at the bottom yelling, "Does anybody want to buy a
Right,
painting?"
right, right.
You know,
Right.
it kind of feels like that. It
Yeah.
feels like that.
Yeah. I think going back to what you were saying about mental health,
Yeah.
um, I think there's something that so what I would tell somebody about like if they're in a place where they feel really heavy, right? And they feel
Yeah.
burdened down by what's happening, I would say to listen to that, right? And
Yeah.
to it's okay to stop, right? It's
Yeah.
okay to say, "Hey, I can't." And like you said, sometimes you have to tell your clients, "Hey, listen, I'm not gonna be able to do this. I'm not gonna be able to make this happen." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
got to figure something else out. And hopefully you're in environments and around people and in situations where you can say, "Hey, this is what I got." I mean, you may not say exactly what you have going on, but you say, "Hey, look, I got something
Right.
going on. It's an emergency. I can't do this right now." And hopefully you got people who are saying, "Cool, take as much time as you need." That's something that for
Yeah.
me, like
Yeah.
I've been in situations with different artists and different creators, and they're like, "Yo, I got this happening, this, that, and the third." I'm like, "Bet, take as much time as you need." Because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, I'm more concerned about the human, the person,
Right.
than I am
Right.
about me getting this story done. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I think that's really important to say because so this is something I see a lot in sort of like the artist and writer connecting groups and forums that you see on Facebook are these people asking for advice on like, you know, I'm having trouble with like my creator, whether it be an artist or a writer or whatever. You know, they're going through something and I don't trust that they're going to be able to like meet my deadline. I don't trust that they're producing the way that I want them to produce. And I think that that comes down to people not understanding how to have that conversation of like, hey, I just need to be honest with you. Like, normally I would be able to do this. Normally I can meet the deadline that I told you I was going to give you. But here are the things that have happened to me because we've been so conditioned socially by that sort of consumerist culture, capitalist structure to expect work through it. Don't talk about it. Keep it out of the workplace. It's not professional. If you like talk about what's actually going on in your life, what's actually affecting your mental health and how it's impacting your performance. So there's this like disconnect that happens between collaborators and it results in this tension of, well, do I like ask for my money back? Do I like quit the project and cut my losses and like go to somebody else that, you know, won't have this like problem producing? um and it's something that like whenever I get the chance, I tell people like, hey, you know, give them like the benefit of the doubt. Like, you don't know what's happening in this person's life, and if they don't know how to communicate with you, maybe you should communicate with them and be like, hey, it's okay if something's going on, just tell me.
Right.
Just like clue me in to whatever level you're comfortable at.
Right.
And you know, some people may say that that's not professional, but I don't believe that that's true. I believe that we're like an evolving workforce that is starting to recognize and acknowledge that mental health is important to productivity and to like quality of life.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we make that a professional conversation, you know?
Yeah. And I think like for me, and this might be an issue I might need to evaluate. But
Okay.
like, when I'm working with people, I don't like sometimes like you'll call me a client and I'm like, I'm a client. Like what? Like I thought we was friends. Like what? You know what I'm saying? So like when I'm working with people, I'm like, no, like this is my friend. Like we're,
Right.
and so as soon as we're collaborating, I'm like, nah, like I'm gonna treat you like my friend. I'm not treating you like
Yes.
I hired you to do so. I'm treating you like you my
Yeah.
friend. So if you say you got something going on, I'm like, yo, you got something going on. Take care of your business. We get back to this later. And so, but I think that's interesting because, like you said, well, maybe that's not professional. And for me, I don't think like, oh, I need to be professional. I'm thinking like, yo,
Yeah.
I need to be a friend in this situation. I need to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
compassionate in this situation.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what's interesting about that is maybe that's not always professional.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know, like, has that rubbed you the wrong way? Like, because I don't know if I don't think I've been professional. I think I've just been like,
No, no,
you know what
no.
I'm saying?
So I think it's interesting because we talk about like compartmentalization, and this is something that I spoke about recently in like a local business owners group, how to toe the line between working with like small businesses and independent creators versus working with companies and like corporate spaces.
All right.
So like, and I think this shows like the difference in our experiences as professionals, right? So like you work in an indie space, which is a little more not casual, but like empathetic and sort of like more
Casual.
camaraderie, you know, versus I have kind of a foot in both worlds. I work in the indie space, but I also come from a background of like administrative work within like the creative spaces. I've worked in more commercial settings. I also still work with like traditional publishing companies and that kind of thing. So I have to kind of put on like a
You're a
different
beast. You are.
you know, I have to put on like I have to put myself into two different
Yeah.
worlds, right? And sometimes it kind of bleeds into the other. And I think one of the most common uh like feedback that I get from people that I work with is, "Oh, you've been such a professional artist. Like
Mm.
I'm so like happy to work with somebody who's like structured and organized and like approaches it this way." And in my mind, I'm like, "Well, this would never fly if I was
Mm.
like working with this company."
Right, 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 right,
You
right.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, man, there was something else I was gonna say, but now I don't remember.
In our differences of experiences.
No, I just think I don't know. I just think this is a really valuable conversation because, and I think going back to what our topic is when we talk about life and we talk about
Yeah.
how life can get in the way, the thing is, life is always getting in the way. You know what I'm saying? Like, I
Yeah.
think about like the news cycle, and I'm like, really, is if it's not a war, it's a pandemic. If it's not a pandemic, it's
Right.
something with a politician. You know what I'm saying? If it's not that, it's a scandal.
Yeah.
Like something is always happening. And then in our
Yeah.
individual lives, like, you know, something is happening with, whether it's your neighbor or you're trying to help your neighbor or your friend down the street or your
Yeah.
mom or your kids or your pets. Like it's just something is always happening. And so this juggle of balancing life and art,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's this constant ebb and flow and like tug of war, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
And it's like a dance, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I just think for me, it's like sometimes I think, well, how can I escape it? Right? How can I get out of it? How can I get
Right.
away from it? When in reality, it's like getting away from it is futile. You really just gotta live it. You just gotta do it. You know what I'm saying? You just gotta do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the most unique things about being an indie creator is a lot of us work from like home offices and home spaces. So we are intertwined with our daily life a lot more than somebody that, goes to an office or goes to a studio that's outside of their home to work. And it is really easy for life just to be like constantly happening.
Yeah.
And and being able to develop the, I don't know if you would call it a skill, but to be able to develop sort of like, I feel like what has been really helpful for me is that compartmentalization factor of like, when I sit at my desk, that's it. Like everything else is done. And I think you'll notice like anytime that I've said like I can't like get to something, it's because I actually use the phrase like I'm not at my desk. I like can't I won't be at my desk until later.
Mhm.
That's something that I say to clients is like I'm away from my desk until this time.
Yeah.
Because that's like the sacred space, where like everything stops there. But then look, you run into things like, my husband and I have had like a housing nightmare
Mm.
crisis for the last 2 years since we moved to Florida, where like every house that we've moved into, there's been some type of disaster that has happened. And when you work from home, it's like, well, I can't work because my studio is currently being ripped apart by a crew of like construction workers.
Right. Right.
There is no physical way for me to be in my like workspace right
Right.
now. And how do you navigate that? How do you navigate just the psychological weight that is having constant access to the news cycle, having, there's right now, at least where I am, there's lots of protest happening. There's lots of like calls to community action, like those kind of things. How do you decide where to spend your time
Yeah.
while also finding time to create and create in a productive, like effective way?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing about the Rainy and Rose show is you're not gonna get any easy answers.
No. Once again, we have absolutely no solutions
Right.
whatsoever for that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's no easy answers. I mean, I think, and just to wrap up, because I think we're coming up on our time, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just think One, it goes back to your individual flow, like what you decide for yourself as an artist, and just being true to that. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
if you know that you can, like I say all the time, like, hey, don't let anything stop you. Like keep going, keep going, keep going. But you really can't always keep going. Like sometimes
Yeah. You still have
you
to
need to
protect
stop.
yourself,
Yeah, you got
protect
to
your mental
protect
health.
yourself, and you got to
Yeah.
rest, and and that may be something that we do on another episode. Maybe even have like, I don't know if they have like creative like therapists or something like that, but have somebody
Yeah.
come on and share some tactics or
Yeah.
things that you can do to make sure that you're protecting your mental
Yeah.
health, and you're
Well,
taking
so
care of yourself.
I'll be the first one to admit, like I'm somebody who still, like, to this day, struggles with protecting my mental health. I will give way more than I should to my work, and I've learned over the past 2 years techniques to, like, help me maintain a semblance of protecting my mental health, because otherwise, like, I'm anxious, I'm neurotic, I'm obsessive, like, I would just fall apart if I didn't implement. One, I have a very, like, strict schedule and structure, and I have all of these little tricks that I use to make sure that I don't fall apart. And I'll be totally honest, sometimes even through all of that, it doesn't work, and I just need like a day or two to
Yeah,
not be present, like in my studio, not be connected to like the world at all. Um, and that's something that I think we should definitely talk about on a future episode, because I think so many people struggle with it.
yeah,
And
for sure,
yeah,
for sure. Well, Kayla, unless you have anything else that you would like to say.
I don't think so.
All right.
I
Well,
think I took up too much time talking.
no, it was great. It was great. I loved it. I loved it. We're gonna go ahead and get out of here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Rolam. You can find me at rolam.com or on Instagram at Rolam. You can also subscribe to my Patreon at
Do it.
patreon.com/Rolam. And yeah, Kayla, where can they find you at?
You can find me at Rainy Days Art on all social media platforms. You can also
So
find me at
beautiful.
my
Why couldn't I get that? That's so
website.
beautiful. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, I cut you off. I'm sorry. Continue.
Practice. You just have to say it in the mirror like 500 times. It
Yeah.
goes.
Oh my goodness.
And you can find me at my website, www.rainydaysart.com, and anywhere that they find you.
Awesome. Well, we are going to go ahead and get out of here. We love you guys, and we will talk with you soon.